In the quiet farmlands of Western Ireland, the Byrne family lived a simple life. It was 1821, a time when survival depended on the soil, and every child was expected to grow into a worker who could carry the weight of the family's needs. Life was not about mysteries or miracles. It was about bread, potatoes, and labor. But for young Eamon Byrne, the world held something far different. At 6 years old, he began to speak words that stopped his parents cold. One chilly morning, as his mother prepared oatcakes over the fire, Eamon toddled in, humming softly. She assumed he was making up a song, the kind children often invent. But when she leaned closer, she realized his humming was not just sounds, it was words. Words with rhythm, with meaning, yet entirely unfamiliar. "Eamon, what is that you're saying?" his mother asked, puzzled. The boy looked up innocently. "I don't know, ma'am. They just come to me." The words flowed from his lips in strings, steady and confident, as if he had always known them. He could repeat them, rearrange them, even sing them. His mother called for his father, who listened with a furrowed brow. "That's not Irish," his father muttered. "And it's not English either." They wondered if perhaps he had overheard a traveler or a priest speaking Latin, but none of it matched. No one in their small village recognized the language. At first, the parents brushed it off as childish imagination. But the words kept coming. Eamon spoke them in the mornings as he dressed, whispered them to himself while chasing chickens in the yard, and even called them out in his sleep. The language was not something he was inventing on the spot. It was something alive inside him. At night, when the fire was low, his parents would whisper. Could it be a sign? His mother wondered. Or a curse? His father replied grimly. In those days, anything unusual carried the weight of suspicion. Villagers believed in omens, in signs from heaven, or from darker places. And though his parents loved him dearly, even they could not explain what they heard. But his mother noticed something that softened her fear. When Eamon spoke the strange words, his eyes lit up, and a calmness settled over him. It was as if he was speaking something older than himself, a language carried in his bones. "Whatever it is," she whispered to her husband, "it cannot be evil if it brings him peace." Eventually, neighbors began to hear. One afternoon, while helping his father repair a fence, Eamon began chanting the strange syllables. A neighbor passing by stopped, eyes narrowing. "What tongue is that, lad?" he asked. Eamon only shrugged. "I don't know, sir. It's just the way the words come." By nightfall, the whispers had spread. The Byrne boy speaks in a tongue no one knows. Some villagers shook their heads, dismissing it as childish nonsense. Others whispered darker suspicions. Was the boy cursed? Touched by something unholy? In a time when superstition ran deep, being different was dangerous. Soon, Eamon noticed the stares. Children avoided him in games, parents pulled their little ones away when he passed. Though only a boy, he felt the sting of being seen as strange. For Eamon, the language felt natural. He did not understand why it frightened others. To him, it was simply part of who he was. When alone, he would sit by the stream near his home, speaking to the water in his mysterious tongue. Sometimes he imagined the stream answered back. Other times he would whisper the words to the wind, as if it carried his speech to faraway places. He once asked his mother, "Why don't the others like my words?" Her heart broke at the question. She knelt and took his hands. "Because they do not understand what they mean, my love. People often fear what they cannot understand." Eamon thought about this deeply. Even as a child, he realized that fear was not about him. It was about the limits of others. Though the language isolated him, it also began to build resilience within him. He learned early that being different was not easy, but it forced him to find strength from within rather than from others' approval. One evening, when a group of boys teased him by mimicking his strange speech, Eamon did not cry or lash out. Instead, he stood tall and said, "You may not know what I say, but I know it. That's enough for me." The boys laughed, but he walked away with dignity. That was the beginning of his courage, the courage to own what set him apart. The first strange words Eamon spoke marked more than the discovery of a mysterious language. They marked the beginning of a journey, a boy learning to embrace what made him different, even when the world around him resisted. In truth, every person carries a language others might not understand. For some, it is a dream others mock. For others, it is a talent that doesn't fit the norm. Like Eamon, we may face ridicule, suspicion, or isolation. But the lesson of his early years is clear: difference is not a curse. It is the seed of purpose. The boy who spoke words no one else knew would one day grow into a young man who understood the power of standing firm in who he was. And it all began with the first strange words that refused to be silenced. When the first whispers about Eamon Burns' strange language spread through the village, curiosity quickly turned into suspicion. In 1821 rural Ireland, difference was rarely welcomed. People lived by tradition, by what was known and safe. Anything that strayed too far from the familiar carried the mark of danger. Eamon, only a child of 7, could not have understood the depth of fear he awakened in others. But he felt it sting every day in the way people looked at him, the way they spoke just low enough for him to hear, and the way children once eager to play now turned away. At first, the villagers leaned close when Eamon spoke his strange words. Some smiled, saying, "Ah, the lad's got an imagination." Others chuckled, thinking he was playing some childish trick. But when they realized he could repeat the words fluently, when they noticed the rhythm of a language, its structure, its consistency, they grew uneasy. It wasn't a game nor something the boy was making up on a whim. It was something else entirely. One man muttered, "There are tongues best left unspoken. This boy could bring us trouble." Another whispered that perhaps Eamon was touched by spirits. Fear is contagious. Soon, even those who pitied the boy kept their distance. The hardest part for Eamon was the silence of his peers. Once he had been welcome among the other children. They played stick games in the fields and raced along the riverbanks. But as the whispers spread, the games shifted without him. When he approached, the children fell quiet. Some mimicked his strange words in cruel tones, twisting them into nonsense. Others simply ran. Eamon, still so young, could not understand why the friends who once laughed with him now acted as though he carried a sickness. One afternoon, standing alone at the edge of the meadow, he watched the other boys play a game of chase. He wanted to join but dared not step closer. A lump rose in his throat, and for the first time, he realized that his difference had a cost. He no longer belonged. At home, his mother tried to soften the edges of his loneliness. She told him stories at night, reminding him that some of the greatest men in scripture and legend had been set apart, misunderstood before their worth was seen. "Remember, Eamon," she whispered as she tucked him into bed. "What others fear today, they may admire tomorrow." But her comfort could not erase the burden he carried daily. Even his father, though never unkind, was restless around him. The man worried that the boy's gift, or curse, would bring unwanted attention. Their family, already struggling to survive, could not bear the weight of gossip and suspicion forever. Eamon felt the quiet tension in his home. He understood, even if no one said it outright, that his words had made him different, not just in the village, but even within his own family. As weeks turned into months, Eamon found refuge in solitude. He began spending hours by the river near their home. Sitting on a flat stone, he would speak the strange words into the rushing water. The river, at least, did not flinch. Sometimes he imagined the water understood him. The way it carried his words downstream felt like a kind of conversation. Alone, he could speak without shame. Alone, he was free. The solitude, while painful, became a teacher. It showed Eamon that strength could grow in silence, that one did not always need an audience to find meaning. He began to realize that what made him different was not something to bury, but something to carry, even if no one else wanted to share its weight. Isolation also planted seeds of courage in the boy. One evening, a group of boys taunted him near the village square, mimicking his language in loud, mocking voices. At first, shame burned in his chest. He wanted to run, but instead he stood still and said calmly, "You can laugh, but these words are mine. They belong to me, not you." The boys quieted, surprised by his composure. They did not stop teasing him forever, but Eamon had discovered something vital. Though he could not control how others treated him, he could control how he carried himself. That realization was a turning point. Though the weight of isolation pressed on him, it also shaped him. Eamon grew sharper in observation, keener in spirit, and stronger in resilience. Where other children sought approval from their peers, Eamon learned to find peace within himself. He began to notice that even those who feared him sometimes leaned in to listen, if only for a moment when he spoke. Deep down, they were curious. Their fear was rooted not in hatred of him, but in their own inability to understand. This realization gave Eamon a quiet strength. They were not rejecting him, they were rejecting their own fear. The weight of isolation is heavy, especially for a child. But in Eamon's story, we see how even the loneliness of being different can shape resilience. His isolation became his forge, teaching him lessons most children would never learn so young. That approval is fragile, but dignity endures. That solitude, though painful, can also be a place of strength. That difference, even when feared, holds value. Eamon Byrne's early years remind us that being set apart is never easy. Yet sometimes, the very loneliness that wounds us is also what prepares us to stand tall later in life. The boy who spoke a language no one else understood was already learning a universal truth. Our differences are not chains, but keys, if we are brave enough to carry them. By the time Eamon Byrne turned 8, his reputation in the village had settled into something between unease and reluctant tolerance. People no longer gawked at him in the streets, but the whispers remained. Some saw him as peculiar, others as a possible danger. Yet none could deny that he was different. Then, one winter, an event occurred that changed not only how others saw him, but also how he saw himself. It was a cold January morning in 1823 when a horse-drawn cart rolled into the village. A tall, thin man descended, carrying a leather satchel stuffed with papers. He was not a farmer or a merchant. His black coat and polished boots marked him as something unusual, a scholar. The man's name was Professor Alistair Green, a traveling academic from Dublin. He was known for his interest in old manuscripts and forgotten tongues. He had come to the countryside to collect folk stories and bits of oral history, never expecting to hear of a living boy who spoke a mysterious language. When a villager, half in jest, mentioned the Byrne lad who talks in tongues, the professor's curiosity ignited. He sought out the Byrne home that very evening. Eamon's parents were hesitant. They had learned to protect their son from strangers who mocked or judged him. But something in the professor's manner, calm, respectful, curious rather than fearful, persuaded them to allow him inside. Eamon, shy but polite, sat by the fire as the man adjusted his spectacles and asked, "Your parents tell me you speak in words that are not their own. Could you show me?" For a moment, the boy hesitated. He had learned the pain of ridicule, but something about the professor's steady gaze gave him courage. Slowly, he spoke a few sentences in the strange tongue, letting the words roll off his lips as naturally as breathing. The professor froze, his eyes widened, his face went pale. He whispered, "Impossible." Professor Green asked him to repeat certain phrases, listening intently. He scribbled furiously in his notebook, muttering to himself, This resembles an ancient Celtic dialect, but older, closer to fragments I've only seen in manuscripts preserved in Trinity College. It should not be alive in any living person's memory. And yet, he looked at Eamon in awe. "You speak it fluently." Eamon frowned. "But sir, I don't know what I'm saying. The words just come." "That," the professor replied softly, "is what makes it extraordinary." For the first time in his life, Eamon heard someone speak of his gift not with fear, not with mockery, but with reverence. As the professor explained, Eamon's mother clasped her hands together, her face lit with hope. For years, she had defended her son against whispers of curses and madness. Now here was proof that what set him apart had meaning. His father, though more cautious, admitted, "If what you say is true, then perhaps the boy was not meant to shame us but to teach us." Those words were a balm to Eamon's heart. For so long his difference had been a burden his family carried in silence. Now, for the first time, it seemed like a gift. Before leaving, Professor Green knelt so he was level with the boy. "Eamon," he said firmly, "you must listen to me. People may still laugh, they may still fear, but hear me well. If you carry a gift, no matter how heavy, it is not meant to be wasted. The world may not understand you now, but one day it may need you." Eamon stared back, absorbing every word. The professor's voice carried a weight that made the boy's heart beat faster.
You mean it has a purpose? Yes,
Green replied. A great one, though it may take years for you to see it. The boy nodded slowly. For the first time, he believed that his strange words were not simply a curse to endure, but a responsibility to carry. The next morning, the professor left the village, his satchel heavier with notes and his mind buzzing with wonder. He promised to return but never did. Scholars were busy men, and his path took him elsewhere. But he left behind something far more important than his notebook. He left Eamon with a spark. That spark was belief. Belief that his difference could matter, that it might serve others someday. It was small, fragile, but it was enough to change how Eamon saw himself. In the days that followed, Eamon walked with a little more confidence. When villagers mocked him, he remembered the professor's words. If you carry a gift, it is not meant to be wasted. He began practicing his strange tongue more deliberately, repeating phrases, writing symbols in the dirt by the riverbank. Though he still did not understand the meaning, he treated it as something valuable, something to be tended like a seed. His isolation did not vanish overnight. Children still teased him, and adults still whispered. But now he carried within him a quiet strength. Their voices no longer defined him, for he had heard another voice, a voice that told him he was more than strange. He was chosen. The scholar's visit was a turning point in Eamon's life. It showed him that the right person's belief can transform years of doubt. Sometimes, all it takes is one voice of encouragement to awaken courage in another. Eamon's story reminds us, our gifts may not be understood by most people, but that does not mean they lack value. The world is not ready for what we carry, but that does not mean we should bury it. The encouragement, even from a stranger, can be the spark that keeps someone going. The boy who once sat alone by the river now had a reason to keep speaking, to keep believing. His gift, once feared, was now a source of purpose. By the time Eamon Byrne turned 12, the strange words that had once burst from his mouth unbidden had become something he could control. He no longer blurted them at random moments, but could summon them when he wished, reciting them softly under his breath like a prayer. The memory of Professor Green's visit years before had not left him. Those words, "If you carry a gift, it is not meant to be wasted," had planted themselves in his heart. Yet even with this new sense of purpose, life was not easy. The villagers still regarded him with suspicion. Children who once mocked him now kept their distance, whispering to each other when he passed. Parents warned their little ones not to catch the strangeness of the Byrne boy. Eamon could have withdrawn, living in silence with his secret, but something inside him would not let him. He began to ask himself, what if these words were not only for me? What if they were meant for others too? It began almost by accident. One autumn evening, Eamon sat by the riverbank tracing symbols in the mud, shapes he felt belonged to the language though he didn't understand them. A younger boy, Liam, approached curiously. "What are those?" Liam asked. Eamon froze, expecting ridicule, but Liam's eyes were wide with fascination, not scorn. "It looks like writing." "Can you show me?" For a moment Eamon hesitated. Then, slowly, he drew another symbol, explaining as best he could. "This one, I don't know what it means, but it feels like a sound, like a doorway to a word." Liam copied it clumsily in the dirt, grinning. "It feels like magic." That small exchange lit something in Eamon's heart. For the first time, instead of hiding his gift, he had shared it, and instead of fear, he was met with wonder. In the weeks that followed, Eamon began meeting Liam by the river. What started as playful mimicry grew into lessons. He taught Liam the sounds of certain words, showing him how to shape them with his mouth. To Eamon's surprise, Liam was eager to learn, repeating the phrases until his tongue stumbled less and less. Soon, 2 other children joined, drawn by curiosity. At first they laughed at the strangeness, but when they realized they were learning something unique, something no one else in the village could do, they too grew serious. They met in secret, away from prying eyes, in barns behind hedgerows, in the quiet fields at dusk. Eamon became their teacher. He was not much older than his pupils, yet he carried himself with a quiet authority. guiding them with patience. Still, doubts gnawed at him. Was this foolish, he wondered. Was he leading these children into danger? What if the villagers discovered them and branded him a corrupter of youth? There were nights he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, consumed by fear. But then he remembered the look on Professor Green's face, the awe in his eyes when he first heard the language. He remembered his mother's pride when she realized her son's difference was no curse. And most of all, he remembered the joy on Liam's face when he first traced a symbol in the dirt and got it right. That joy gave him courage. One evening, as Eamon guided the children through a chant of syllables, he noticed something remarkable they began to understand. Not fully, but enough. When one child stumbled, another corrected him without Eamon's prompting. They were learning not just the sounds, but the rhythm, the shape, the heart of the language. It struck Eamon like a revelation. This is not just mine anymore. It belongs to them too. At that moment, he realized he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer just a boy burdened with a strange gift. He was a teacher, a guide, a bearer of knowledge. Of course, secrets rarely remain hidden. One evening, a villager spotted the children gathered around Eamon in the fields, repeating strange words. By morning, whispers spread through the village like wildfire. "The burn boy is corrupting our children," one man shouted at the market. "He fills their heads with devil's speech." But something unexpected happened. Liam's mother, a widow who had once kept her son far from Eamon, stepped forward. "He is not corrupting them," she said firmly. "He is teaching them. My boy comes home brighter, more curious. Tell me, is curiosity a sin?" Others hesitated. They did not trust Eamon. But they could not deny that no harm had come of his teaching. Slowly, the anger dimmed into wary acceptance. Though the villagers still looked at him with suspicion, Eamon no longer felt afraid. He had discovered a truth: fear loses its power when you choose to live for something greater than yourself. Every lesson he taught deepened his own understanding of the language. By teaching, he learned. By guiding others, he grew stronger. The words that once isolated him were now building bridges. Eamon's decision to teach was more than an act of bravery. It was an act of defiance against shame. Where others had told him to hide, he chose to share. Where others had mocked, he chose to uplift. His story teaches us that the gifts grow when shared. What seems strange or heavy in isolation can become meaningful when passed on. Courage begins small. Teaching one curious child by a river can blossom into a legacy. Purpose outweighs fear. When we commit to serving others, ridicule and suspicion lose their sting. By choosing to teach, Eamon transformed not only how others saw him, but how he saw himself. He was no longer the boy burdened with a secret. He was a teacher, a leader, a keeper of knowledge. And though he did not know it yet, these early lessons would ripple far beyond the fields and barns of his little village. They would become the foundation of something lasting, something that would outlive him. By the time Eamon Byrne reached his late teens, the strange gift that had once set him apart had become a defining part of his identity. He was no longer simply the Byrne boy who mutters in tongues. He was now a young man others quietly sought for guidance, curiosity, or even courage. But such recognition did not come without hardship. With each step forward, adversity rose to meet him. Despite his efforts to teach and to share, some villagers remained suspicious. No matter how much good he did, helping children learn discipline through the language, comforting widows with words that carried peace, or even warning farmers about weather changes he somehow sensed, there were always those who clung to fear. At the tavern, Eamon often heard muttered words: devil's tongue, strange boy, trouble waiting to happen. He tried to ignore them, but the sting never fully dulled. Adversity, he realized, was not a season that passed. It was a shadow that followed, and so he needed to decide whether to let it break him or teach him resilience. One winter tested him more than any before. The cold came early and hard. Snow buried the fields, livestock starved, and families huddled in cottages with dwindling supplies. In times of desperation, people often turned on those they least understood. That winter, a sick child in the village died, and whispers pointed toward Eamon. He speaks curses. One man spat. What if his strange words brought this plague upon us? fear spread faster than reason. Stones were thrown at his door. One night, torches flickered outside his family's cottage as angry voices demanded he leave. Eamon felt fear grip his chest like iron. But instead of fleeing, he stepped outside, trembling yet unbroken. "If you believe I bring curses, I will leave," he said, voice steady despite his pounding heart. "But if you believe that perhaps my gift may help, then let me try. Let me serve, not harm." His courage disarmed the mob. They dispersed that night, though not all were convinced. Still, something shifted. His willingness to face their hatred without striking back planted seeds of doubt in their fear. After that night, Eamon realized an important truth: adversity is not only about what others do to us. It is about what we do with what they give. He could have responded with anger, shouting back, fueling their fears. Instead, he chose calm. He chose to be the opposite of what they expected. This choice did not come easily. Inside, he wrestled with anger and hurt. But he disciplined himself, remembering the professor's words from long ago. If you carry a gift, it is not meant to be wasted. To waste it through bitterness would be to betray the very purpose he had been given. Adversity continued, but Eamon learned to meet it with strength. When farmers accused him of bringing bad luck, he helped mend fences and carried feed to their livestock. When old women muttered prayers as he passed, he greeted them warmly, carrying baskets of wood to their hearths. Slowly, some villagers began to see not a curse but a young man of character. His resilience became harder to deny. One day, an elder of the village remarked quietly, "Perhaps the boy is not marked by darkness, but by endurance. Who else would bear so much and still give back?" This remark, though whispered, rippled through others' hearts. Adversity had not destroyed him, it had made him stronger. And that strength was beginning to inspire even his doubters. Eamon's adversity also became a lesson for his students. By now, several youths were learning the ancient tongue from him. They often asked why he did not give up when so many resisted. His answer was always the same: strength is not found when life is easy. It is born when you stand firm in storms. If you wish to carry knowledge, you must also carry patience and courage. The two cannot be separated. These words left an impression. His students, who once joined only out of curiosity, began to see his lessons as more than language. They were learning resilience, discipline, and integrity. The language became a vessel for character. With time, Eamon came to see adversity not as an enemy but as a teacher. It stripped away his pride, forcing him to be humble. It tested his patience, forging his endurance. It demanded courage, which strengthened his spirit. Without adversity, his gift might have made him arrogant or careless. But because he had been pressed and opposed, he learned to hold his gift with reverence, never forgetting its weight. Adversity was painful, yes, but it also purified. Eamon's story in this chapter teaches us something: timeless strength is not measured by how we thrive in comfort, but how we endure in hardship. Whispers and ridicule will always exist, but they lose their power when we live with integrity. The hatred may surround us, but responding with calm strength can disarm even the fiercest critic. The adversity, though bitter, can shape us into people of depth, courage, and influence. By facing his trials head-on, Eamon showed that strength is not about overpowering others, but about mastering oneself. In later years, villagers would look back on the harsh winter and recall the night Eamon faced the mob alone. They remembered not his fear, but his composure. Not his weakness, but his strength. That moment, born in adversity, became part of his legacy. It showed others, especially the children he taught, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand firm despite it. And so, through adversity, the boy who once spoke a language no one understood became a man whose character everyone could admire.